Good evening, everyone. Scott Rustrolz here on May 8th for the Listen and Learn podcast. Hope you all had a great weekend. I know I did. Tonight, we're going to focus on three stories of increasing importance that have been making most of the headlines today. First one to discuss is the Russia hearing held by the Senate Judiciary Committee today. Two real headlines out of it, and the overarching headline is that it continues to be much ado about nothing. The media and the Democrats are incredibly focused on this Russia probe as a way of undermining President Trump's legitimacy, but they continue to have no evidence. And that's exactly what we heard today. James Clapper, he was the head of the Director of National Intelligence, who kind of runs all of the intelligence agencies in Washington, and they all report up into him. So if there'd be anyone who would know anything about Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, it would be him. And what did he say when asked? That he saw no evidence of collusion. In fact, the FBI never even made him aware of any investigation, which would strongly imply that they never found any meaningful evidence of collusion between anyone in Trump's circle and the Russians. So while the Russians may have been doing what they were doing to undermine Americans' faith in our democracy, which is what Clapper said was their primary goal, there was no kind of collusion of any kind between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And without any collusion, there's really no story here. But they'll continue to go on about it. And even acting Attorney General Sally Yates, who was an Obama appointee who, as a holdover, ran the Justice Department for a brief period of time, she too said there was no evidence of collusion. So again, headline number one, there's no evidence of collusion. And at some point, with no facts supporting this continued investigation, we have to move on. The other headline was, again, that General Flynn, acting the temporary, or short-lived, I should say, not temporary, National Security Advisor, screwed up and lied to Vice President Pence about his call with the Russian ambassador. That would be a fireable offense. But he was fired months ago. So again, what's the headline here? That Trump did the right thing by firing Michael Flynn, and Michael Flynn is a very controversial guy. But at this point, that's several months old. It's really not a story at this point. This is just bringing up the same old, tired stuff. And at some point, we need to see through it and demand that Washington move on and focus on actual pressing issues instead of relitigating a non-issue. Second story that is of more importance is what's going on in Texas. So yesterday, their governor, Greg Abbott, signed what he's calling a sanctuary cities ban. Now, it's not quite that. What essentially it does is the law bans cities, counties, and universities from prohibiting their local law enforcement from asking about immigration status and enforcing federal immigration law. So while individual police departments may not enforce these laws aggressively, the city can't come in over the top and ban them from enforcing immigration laws. Considering the fact that Texas is a border state that has 10 to 15% of the nation's illegal immigrant population, and over the past 5 years has processed and deported nearly 150,000 criminal illegal aliens, this is a pretty big move and is a blow against the sanctuary cities. So while we've been unable to, at the federal level, launch a serious blow against sanctuary cities, you're seeing some of the states act more proactively. And Texas acting is a big deal. So the law essentially will allow police officers to ask a person's immigration status during any legal detention. Now, this is where people are going to bring up the failed SB 1070 Arizona law, which the Supreme Court overruled as unconstitutional. And there are some very big distinctions here. The primary one is that the Texas law essentially says that you cannot ban a police officer from asking these questions, whereas the Arizona law mandated that a police officer ask these questions. And that's where there were concerns in Arizona of harassment, where there were police were essentially fake enforcing laws just to primarily go after immigration. Where here, if immigration status is a relevant question in a case, the police officers can now ask for that. At the same time, Texas law enforcement must now honor any federal detainers. That means that if the federal government has put out a detainer for an individual for being an illegal immigrant, that Texas local law enforcement must notify ICE that this person has been incarcerated and hand them over for deportation. This strikes me as a very sane thing to do. If there's a dangerous person that the federal government wants to get out of the country, local authorities should be cooperating. We should not have blanket bans blocking local authorities from turning over dangerous people to the federal government to get them out of the country. That kind of system and that kind of ban essentially prioritizes the needs of a dangerous criminal, illegal alien, potentially at the expense of citizens, where if anything, our policies should be aimed at keeping citizens safe. Key thing, I think that this speaks to is that you have seen a slow shift in federal and local immigration policy since Trump has taken place. Trump has taken over on January 20th. In fact, since January 20th, you've seen border crossings plummet, and in March, border crossings were down 72%. Essentially what I'd say is we've constructed a verbal wall where illegal immigrants know that if they come here, there's a very high probability they're going to be sent back, so they're not trying to cross the border. This action in Texas only further drives that point. The problem is that a verbal wall is temporary in nature, because you could have a new administration come over that takes on a much more Obama-like, we're not going to enforce the laws. You can come here. And that is why we need to build a permanent wall. If you put a physical wall there, no matter what any rhetoric of a future president is, that barricade will still be there to limit potential illegal immigration flow. So you're seeing a big move here in Texas to crack down on sanctuary cities that dovetails with the verbal wall that the Trump administration has built. But we need to take this to the next level, actually put in physical barrier, continue to hire more and more border patrols to ensure that the flow of drugs and people across the border stops. And finally, the big story of the day from a legacy perspective is that Trump announced 10 judges to the federal courts. He's got 119 vacancies to go, but this is the first step in remaking the federal judiciary and ensuring that we have a conservative court for the next generation. 2 of the 10 were from his list during the campaign of people he might appoint to the Supreme Court, one of whom was 48 years old, Joan Larson and David Strauss, the other being 42 years old. Interestingly, it's worth noting that President Bush, in his first year, put Justice John Roberts to the appeals court, and then just several years later, elevated him to the Supreme Court. The Federal Appeals Court is kind of like a AAA baseball team from which both sides can see who is talented and elevate them up to the Supreme Court in a few years. So those are 2 names, Joan Larson and David Strauss, to keep an eye on. May not be the next Supreme Court pick, but if a few years down the road, you could very easily see them end up on the Supreme Court. And this is where, again, it's a huge deal that Harry Reid eliminated the filibuster on all judicial nominees, because you only need 51 votes to push them through instead of the old 60. There should be no problem putting these 10 through. There are another 119 vacancies left. So I'd expect, every 5-6 weeks or so, you're going to see another list of 8, 10, 12 names that Trump is putting on the federal lower and appeals court as he continues to move circuit by circuit the courts back to the right after Obama pushed them all to the left. And these, by putting on 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, he's putting on judges who will be there 25 plus years and will have a generational impact. And this, again, as we talked about last week with Justice Gorsuch, the ability to remake the federal judiciary and reshift that balance of power is a key reason Trump has held on to so much of the Christian right, evangelical right, and will continue to do so. So that's really a big legacy item. So while all of the focus today is on this one-day Russia story where there's nothing there, he behind the scenes is doing something that will have a 30-year impact on the country. And we as voters and informed citizens need to decide which it is that we're going to focus on. So that's tonight's Listen and Learn podcast. Again, hope you enjoyed it. I would love any comments you have. Put it below. If you like the video, maybe give it a thumbs up. Subscribe, and you'll quickly be aware every time we post a new video to YouTube every night. You can also follow us on Facebook. We have a Listen and Learn podcast page. And please follow me on Twitter @ReadAndLearn. Thanks so much and have a great day.